Cameron's cabinet, Theresa May wields the axe. On her first full day in power, she completes a ruthless purge of the old guard. Out goes Michael Gove, out goes Nicky Morgan. But May's leadership rival, Andrea Leadsom, is promoted. And Europe's bemusement at Boris, the new Foreign Secretary, hits back.
It is inevitable that there's going to be a certain amount of plaster coming off the ceiling in the chancelleries of Europe. It wasn't the result that they were expecting.
I'm live in Downing Street this evening, where the new look cabinet is now complete.
Also tonight, Poppy Worthington's dad won't face charges over her death. The CPS says there's insufficient evidence. Poppy's mum says she's angry and disappointed. And breaking records before Rio, Jo Pavey on her 5th Olympic Games.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mark Austin in Downing Street and Charlene White in the studio.
Good evening from Downing Street, where it became clearer by the hour today that Britain's new Prime Minister will do things her way. Theresa May has drawn a line under the Cameron era with sackings, resignations and a ruthless purge of the cabinet. There are contrasting fortunes for her leadership rivals. Andrea Leadsom is promoted to Environment. Michael Gove is dumped altogether. And contrary to expectations, there is just one more woman than in Mr Cameron's cabinet. We begin tonight with our Deputy Political Editor Chris Shipp on Mrs May's wholesale changes.
Such is the speed of change blowing through Westminster, Theresa May isn't yet able to sleep in Downing Street. For the time being, as she was this morning, she will be driven to the office until her bed is in place. But given her workload at the moment, sleep is something the Prime Minister doesn't have much time for. And this man was in her sights from the moment she woke up. Michael Gove, who might have been expecting to keep a job in the cabinet, was sacked. The price perhaps for the disloyalty he showed Boris Johnson. It was, however, proof Theresa May decided he could no longer be trusted. And the man Theresa May promoted to party chairman today, the former coal miner Patrick McLaughlin, acknowledged reshuffles are, for some, brutal.
The politics is tough when people who've done jobs have to lose those jobs or get those jobs changed. That's part of politics, and they will know.
And they certainly did know that this morning. Michael Gove was the first to be axed, also sacked Nicky Morgan, the Education Secretary who'd supported Mr Gove for leader. And John Whittingdale lost his job as Culture Secretary. Stephen Crabb, so recently a leadership contender, went into Downing Street but later resigned. Sajid Javid keeps his job but becomes Community Secretary. A promotion for Liz Truss, now Justice. And Justine Greening gets Education. Ms Greening, who revealed she was in a same-sex relationship just days ago, is also in charge of the Equalities Brief. She told me as she left for her new department, it was her perfect job. Now, if you're a junior doctor, you might want to look away now. Jeremy Hunt arrived without his NHS badge on his lapel, which led many to conclude he was expecting a new job. But when he emerged from number 10, he nodded to the cameras when asked if he was still Health Secretary.
I've just got to squeeze through.
And that NHS badge was firmly pinned back in place.
Did the Prime Minister ask you to take a different approach to the junior doctors?
It would appear, however, the same approach. The imposition of the new contract is what he has planned. And as if you need a reminder of how quickly politics has changed in this country, this time last week, Andrea Leadsom here had finished in the final 2 for the Conservative leadership. Today she saw her former rival and now new boss and got a new cabinet job. DEFRA, or Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, is another department which will be impacted by Brexit. Farmers and fishermen currently get huge subsidies from the EU, from which Mrs Leadsom campaigns to leave. For all the talk of promoting women to the cabinet table, there is tonight just one more than there was around David Cameron's. Progress perhaps, but for many, not quite the progress they might have expected. Chris Shipp, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, the appointment of Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary has been met with a mixture of amusement, bemusement and frankly some astonishment around the world. The French Foreign Minister called him a liar. His German counterpart said he was irresponsible. Mr Johnson brushed off the criticism today and said Brexit was a huge opportunity for Britain. Our political correspondent Romilly Weeks reports on his eventful first day in office.
What would you say to those who are unhappy about you being Foreign Secretary?
For someone with a rather chaotic reputation, it wasn't the best start. The new Foreign Secretary clutching his new red box, but totally confused as to the whereabouts of his ministerial car. If he's taking a while to get used to the new reality, the same could be said for the rest of the world.
Come here. Thank you, so sorry.
Watch the reaction of the US State Department spokesman as he hears the news of Mr Johnson's appointment.
Foreign Secretary has just been announced as Boris Johnson. How do you think this will affect?
Smile swiftly removed, he remembers to be diplomatic.
Well, look, I mean, we're always going to be able to work with the British, no matter who is occupying the role of Foreign Secretary.
The Germans were much less so.
Es ist bitter für Großbritannien.
Their foreign minister laying into irresponsible politicians who encourage Brexit and run off to play cricket. As for the French, they just call him a liar with his back against the wall. So what does the Foreign Secretary think of his global welcome?
It is inevitable that there's going to be a certain amount of plaster coming off the ceiling in the chancelleries of Europe. It wasn't the result that they were expecting, and clearly they're making their views known in a frank and free way. I have to say that the gentleman that you mentioned, the French Foreign Minister, in fact has sent me a charming letter just a couple of hours ago. Thanks a lot.
Boris Johnson won't be in sole charge of Britain's relations with the world, though. He's sharing that with these two fellow Brexiteers, Liam Fox on international trade and David Davis on Brexit.
Oh, we'll decide all those collectively.
He's written negotiations mustn't be hurried and the whole process should be completed to allow triggering of Article 50 before or by the beginning of next year. Theresa May has made sure she can't be accused of rowing back on Brexit with these three appointments, but with her most surprising new colleague, chiefly known around the world for his antics on a zip wire. For this new chapter, Boris Johnson is going to need his feet firmly on the ground. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
Well, if you think Boris Johnson had a tricky start, spare a thought for the new Chancellor, Philip Hammond. He's taking over at the Treasury with the economy in post-referendum shock and facing recession. But today he ruled out an emergency budget and even hinted the country may be willing to borrow to boost infrastructure and growth, as our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
10 Downing Street may be the centre of attention, but the next-door neighbours are also hard at work. Borrowing is cheap, and though an expected cut in interest rates didn't materialise today, the new Chancellor still sounds tempted to take a more relaxed approach to it than his predecessor.
As a matter of economic principle, are you prepared to borrow to invest?
Look, borrowing when the cost of money is cheap has some great attractions. But this country is already highly indebted and we need to be very careful about the signals we send to markets about our intentions. So it's about getting the balance right.
That doesn't sound like a no.
Making sure that we borrow and invest wisely where we can make big impacts on Britain's productivity and thus get a return on that investment.
It sounds a bit less like the last Conservative Chancellor and a bit more like Alistair Darling, the last Labour one. So is this a bid for Labour's clothes?
It's Labour policy because we need long-term stable investment in our infrastructure and in skills to get our economy growing again. But I don't believe a word of it. I just don't believe a word of it. I've heard this all before. George Osborne said he was going to invest in our infrastructure and the investment pipeline they set up barely delivered.
But economists say the new Chancellor has little option but to relax Osborne's fiscal rules.
Mr Osborne previously was committed to eliminating the deficit entirely, no borrowing, and to do so by 2019-20. Now that was unlikely to be achieved in the face of the UK's decision to leave the European Union. So the interesting question for the Chancellor is, well, if you're prepared to borrow a bit more throughout this Parliament, does the new Chancellor want to get to balance in the next Parliament or not?
And Philip Hammond's answer to that question will determine how many more years of austerity the country faces. He was meeting the US Treasury Secretary in the grandeur of Number 11 today. Meanwhile, George Osborne, the former Chancellor, was spotted outside a cafe with his friend David Cameron, the former Prime Minister. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
And our political editor, Robert Peston, joins me now. So, Robert, quite a day for Mrs May, a big reshuffle and talking to world leaders as well.
That's right. She spoke to President Obama. They agreed that even after Brexit, the famous special relationship between Britain and America should remain special. Slightly surprising to me, she didn't mention a future trading relationship with America, though still the world's biggest economy, given that's going to be so central to our prosperity now that we're leaving the EU. But perhaps the most interesting conversation was with Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission. And I think a sign of tension to come. She said to Juncker that we're paying for a commissioner and therefore he should have a post. Got no guarantee from Juncker that we would get one. He, of course, wants us to leave the EU as quickly as possible. No sign that she's budging on that.
All right, and on the reshuffle, what conclusions do you think we can draw about what sort of government this is going to be?
Well, I mean, a breathtakingly ambitious reshuffle. Just 4 individuals in Cameron's cabinet keeping their jobs. Everybody else either moved or sacked. And some brave sackings, Michael Gove in particular. Now, if I look at the overall balance, it's definitely a shift to the right, which is confusing given that her rhetoric yesterday standing here was very much that she was shifting policy to the left. How do I reconcile that? Well, there are 2 very important appointments at Education and DWP, where the new incumbents would be regarded by most of their Tory colleagues as pretty lefty.
Work and pensions, yeah.
Yeah, that's work and pensions, well, and that's Damien Green, and at Education, Justine Greening. As I say, most of their colleagues would see them as being pretty lefty. And then, of course, in that building just behind you, 10 Downing Street, I think power is going to shift there in a big way, and I think she will be pulling the strings big time.
All right, Robert, it's been quite a week. Thank you very much indeed. And that is it from Downing Street this evening. Now over to Charlene in the studio with the rest of the day's news.
Thanks, Mark. Still to come on the ITV Evening News. Why Chris Froome went from 2 wheels to 2 legs in the Tour de France. And Monty's mishap on his big return to the Open. Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. Prosecutors investigating the death of 13-month-old Poppy Worthington say there's not enough evidence to charge her father with sexually abusing her. A High Court judge concluded earlier this year that poor Worthington had probably assaulted her, something he's always denied. Today, Poppy's mother said the decision not to press charges made her angry and disappointed. Damon Green reports from Cumbria.
Her death just weeks after her first birthday may have been the result of an assault. It may not. But those who loved Poppy Worthington will now never know, because detectives failed to investigate the case properly until it was too late and the evidence was all gone. Today, after prosecutors announced there would be no criminal charges relating to Poppy's death, Cumbria's most senior policeman apologised for the failings of his force.
In our failure to undertake an effective investigation after her death, Cumbria Constabulary has let down Poppy Worthington and her family, and I deeply regret this.
Poppy's mother reacted angrily. In a statement, her solicitor said she's desperate to understand more about the police investigations and the events leading up to Poppy's death. She's angry and disappointed with the decision by the Crown Prosecution Service. Paul Worthington, her former partner, has always denied any wrongdoing. He was arrested on suspicion of sexual assault 3 years ago, but was never charged. His sister says police failures denied him a chance to clear his name.
All the police are saying is to the public, oh look, we've made a mistake, we hold our hands up. It doesn't help him. You know, they've still lost that evidence that will clear him. You know, all they're admitting to is there's no new evidence. Well, no, there wouldn't be any evidence because he hasn't done it.
One police officer still faces disciplinary proceedings over the handling of the case. Another has already retired.
Whoever here in Barrow is responsible for the failure to investigate Poppy Worthington's death, the consequences are clear enough. A mystery which will now never be solved, and a family which will always be bitterly divided. Damon Green, ITV News, in Cumbria.
Police in Australia have renewed calls for information to help find the remains of murdered British backpacker Peter Falconio. The 28-year-old was shot dead while on holiday with his girlfriend 15 years ago, and police are still determined to find his body. And Prince Harry's been tested for HIV to raise awareness of the condition and to show how easy it is to be tested. The result was negative, but he said, gay, straight, black, white, ginger, why wouldn't you have a test? Team GB have set an ambitious medal target for the forthcoming Olympics and Paralympics. They want to win their most ever at an overseas event. One of those hoping to help is athlete Jo Pavey, who's just been selected for a historic 5th Games. She told Duncan Golestani what it means to her.
If collecting an Olympic kit is by now familiar to Jo Pavey, it is no less exciting. Getting picked for her 5th Games was far from guaranteed. The long-distance runner thought London 2012 would be her last, but now at 42 she will compete again, with teammates 20 years younger.
I still love running, I still love aiming for goals, and I'm still enjoying it. And I remember when I was thinking of 2012, I thought, oh, I'll be too old by then, when it was announced in 2005, and never would I have thought that I'd be going to the one after that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
At London 2012, Britain won 65 medals, far more than in Beijing 4 years earlier. With Rio getting ever closer, Team GB has been set a target of winning at least 48 medals. It is a lower number because host countries tend to perform better.
The host nation has a home advantage, and a lot of that's to do with the huge support you get from the public who are actually supporting you in the arenas, and the very familiar environment that you're competing in.
With the largest ever team being kitted up for an away games, coaches can see plenty of medal potential. Duncan Golestani, ITV News.
There were dramatic and unprecedented scenes on stage 12 of the Tour de France this afternoon. It started with a crash between a motorbike and 3 cyclists, including British 2-time winner Chris Froome. With his bike broken and his team car far behind, he was forced to run up the fearsome Mount Ventoux. Eventually, Froome's team caught up and gave him a spare bike, and he completed the climb. Race organisers later ruled he was still the race leader. And finally, the early morning crowds watching the Open at Royal Troon were given a treat today. Local hero Colin Montgomery was the first to tee off after making it through qualifying, and he didn't disappoint. His opening round was classic Monty, with a mixture of temper and talent. And as our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith reports, it went well.
On the tee from Scotland, Colin Montgomery.
This was Monty's moment. In front of his home crowd at his home course, just a short walk away from his childhood home, he was hitting the opening shot at golf's biggest championship. But local knowledge didn't help much when he landed in a bunker on the first hole. It cost him, and you could almost feel his frustration. Right away, though, the former Ryder Cup captain started clawing back. He knows these greens better than anyone, and it showed in a blitz of birdies. Facing a slight headwind on the back nine, Monty relied on this 20-foot monster putt.
Oh, in it goes. Well done, Monty.
To finish on par for the course.
But that's what you'll see today. You'll hear 3 under, 4 under on the way out, and then it's a matter of hanging on the way back. And and remember, this hasn't shown any teeth, this course at all today. This is a 3 out of 10 job here, right? Tomorrow, we're talking 7, 8 out of 10 here.
Monty's right. Rain and wind are expected here, and that'll make conditions tougher. Experience might just come in handy for the man who hasn't won a major golf championship yet. Peter Smith, ITV News at Royal Troon.
Good luck, Monty. Right, that's all for now. Julie Etchingham will be here with news at 10. But from Mark in Downing Street and everyone here, have a very good evening. Goodbye.